For 15,000 years, there was a sound on the Columbia River that could be heard for miles, a roar so loud it echoed off the canyon walls. Celilo Falls. The indigenous peoples called it Wyam, echo of falling water, sound of water upon the rocks. Every year, 15 to 20 million salmon fought their way upstream through these falls. It was the greatest salmon fishery in North America, maybe in the world. Tribes gathered here from across the continent, from Alaska to California, from the Great Plains to the Pacific coast. They came to fish, to trade, to celebrate. Historians called it the Wall Street of the West. Lewis and Clark described it as a great emporium where all the neighboring nations assemble. When they visited in 1805, they saw more people gathered in one place than anywhere else on their entire journey. During spring flooding, 10 times more water passed over Celilo Falls than passes over Niagara Falls today. And standing on wooden platforms built out over the churning water, fishermen caught salmon with 30-foot-long dip nets. This was the oldest continuously inhabited community on the North American continent. It had stood for 15,000 years. Then in 1957, the United States government decided to drown it. In 1855, the Yakima Nation, the Warm Springs tribes, and other Columbia River peoples signed treaties with the United States. They gave up millions of acres of land. In return, the government made them a promise. They could keep fishing at all their usual and accustomed places. Forever, the Supreme Court said these fishing rights were not much less necessary to their existence than the atmosphere they breathed. But by the 1940s, the government had other plans. They wanted electricity, they wanted irrigation, they wanted industry, and they wanted dams. Lots of dams. On March 6, 1947, a government official named Warner Gardner wrote a memo. It was addressed to the Pacific Northwest Coordination Committee. The memo was blunt, direct, shocking. It said the overall benefits to the Pacific Northwest from a thoroughgoing development of the Snake in Columbia are such that the present salmon run must be sacrificed. Let me repeat that. The salmon run must be sacrificed. The memo continued. This means that efforts should be directed toward ameliorating the impact upon the injured interests and not toward a vain attempt to hold still the hands of the clock. Translation: we are going to destroy the salmon. We will try to make it up to you, but we are not going to stop what is coming. The government told the tribes not to worry. Yes, they were building the Dalles Dam. Yes, it would flood Celilo Falls. But they said this would actually help the salmon. An official from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service explained it to a newspaper reporter in 1951. He said it would be easier for the fish to go over a ladder in the dam than to fight their way over Celilo Falls. The dam would eliminate the historic Indian fishery, he admitted, but more fish would reach the spawning grounds in better condition. This was a lie. Biologists already knew dams killed salmon. They had studied it for years. In 1947, a biologist named Harlan Holmes described dam turbines as literal sausage grinders. He estimated that Bonneville Dam was killing 15% of all juvenile fish that passed through. The government knew that dams would devastate salmon populations. They knew the falls had existed for thousands of years without harming the fish. They said it anyway. In 1953, construction began on the Dalles Dam. It would take 4 years to build. 4 years for the tribes to watch as steel and concrete rose from the riverbed. 4 years knowing what was coming, and they were powerless to stop it. March 10th, 1957. At 10 a.m., the order was given. Close the floodgates. At least 10,000 people gathered on the hills above the Columbia River to watch. Some came to celebrate. They saw progress, electricity, jobs, a better future. But the Native Americans came to mourn. They stood in traditional regalia, they sang their songs, they wept. 5-year-old Linda Minas stood with her grandparents, Chief Tommy Thompson and Flora Thompson, near the edge of the falls. A photographer captured the moment. Years later, Linda would say she remembers feeling sad, even as a little girl. She knew something was wrong, just like animals can feel it when something is wrong. The water began to rise. The roar that had echoed for 15,000 years started to fade. 4.5 hours later, it was silent. Celilo Falls disappeared beneath the water. The wooden fishing platforms vanished. The ancient village of Wyam, on Man Osan, Ahomai Optimisyon, In less time than it takes to watch two movies, 15,000 years of continuous habitation ended. One tribal member later said it was like a freight train that suddenly went quiet. The sound died, and with it, a way of life. The government paid the tribes $26.8 million. That worked out to about $3,700 per person for losing their most sacred fishing site, for losing their livelihood, for losing 15,000 years of history, $3,700. The government said they were not buying the fishing rights. Those remain with the tribes. They were just compensating them for the flooded fishing sites. But how do you fish at a site that is underwater? The treaty had promised they could fish at their usual and accustomed places. Now those places were at the bottom of a lake. The government built 26 hatcheries to replace the wild salmon they had destroyed. All but two were located below the dams. They were designed to boost commercial fishing and sport fishing near the ocean, not to help tribal fishermen. The fish from those hatcheries would never swim far enough upstream to reach tribal lands. The tribes received almost none of the benefit. Meanwhile, salmon populations collapsed. Before the dams, an estimated 6 to 16 million salmon returned to spawn in the Columbia River system every year. Today, that number is less than 1 million. Many runs are listed as endangered. Some are extinct. For decades, people assumed the falls had been destroyed, blasted apart during dam construction, the physical evidence of that ancient place gone forever. But in 2008, something remarkable happened. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers conducted a sonar survey of the area. It was the 50-year anniversary of the flooding, and they wanted to see what remained. The sonar images revealed something shocking. The falls are still there, intact, virtually unchanged. Rocky outcrops, carved basins, channels that match aerial photographs from the 1940s. All of it preserved beneath Lake Celilo. The platforms are gone. The village is gone. The people were forced to leave, but the falls themselves are waiting, just 40 feet below the surface. In 2019, tribal leaders from the Yakama Nation and Lummi Nation called for the restoration of Celilo Falls. They pointed out that Indigenous peoples never agreed to the permanent submergence of the falls. They noted that the dam has destroyed fishing sites guaranteed by treaty 150 years ago. The river temperature has become hotter each year because of the reservoir. Salmon populations have declined catastrophically. Everything the government promised would improve has gotten worse. Today, a small Native American community still lives at Celilo Village. It sits on a bluff overlooking the reservoir. They still fish. But it is not the same. One tribal member, Jason Walowitsa, explained it simply. My people have had to sacrifice a lot of these things so everybody else can have that. We pay for that with our culture. The tribes never stopped fighting. They have gone to court dozens of times to protect their treaty rights. They have won major victories. But the fish keep disappearing. The dams remain. And Celilo Falls stays silent beneath the water. The elders who remember the falls are passing away. Soon, no one will be left who heard that roar, who stood on those platforms, who caught salmon in those churning waters. But the memory endures. One tribal elder said Celilo Falls may be gone, but it still echoes in our hearts. It did not die here. It is still here. The tribes call themselves the salmon people. And salmon have always been more than just food. They are relatives, teachers, sacred beings who sacrifice themselves so people can live. Every year the salmon return from the ocean. They swim back to where they were born, against the current, over obstacles, even over dams that were built to stop them. The salmon keep trying, and so do the people.